The United States is placing new economic sanctions on 18 Iranian individuals and groups after it accused Iran of stirring up trouble in the Middle East. The new restrictions come just hours after the White House reluctantly confirmed Iran is meeting the terms of the nuclear agreement made during the Obama era. Margaret Brennan has more.
It violates the spirit of the deal. We will look at it and see whether it violates the letter of the deal, and we will act accordingly.
Iran's top diplomat Javad Zarif said new sanctions announced today by the Trump administration are poisoning already strained relations between the two countries. At stake is the 2015 deal to freeze Iran's nuclear program that President Trump has repeatedly criticized as rewarding a U.S. enemy.
It's one of the worst deals I've ever witnessed.
President Trump wants to scrap the deal or renegotiate.
President Trump said it's a bad deal for Americans and that there are flaws in it.
It isn't. Well, no deal is completely acceptable to everybody.
You're saying Iran is not willing to negotiate. This
is a multilateral deal approved by the Security Council, and it's not a bilateral deal to be withdrawn from or to be renegotiated.
The White House accuses Iran of supporting terrorists in Syria and Iraq, but Zarif disputed that and placed blame on U.S. allies like Saudi Arabia.
These are the countries that are producing terrorists for you, and the United States is going after Iran. I don't know why.
Another irritant, the travel ban on 6 majority Muslim countries, including Iran.
What the United States has done against the Iranian people over the past several months have been really repugnant.
You think it's up to President Trump to show some goodwill?
I certainly think it is up to the U.S. government to stop sending all these hostile signals.
There are also at least 3 Americans detained in Iran, which Zarif acknowledged isn't helping, and they include a Princeton scholar who this week was sentenced to 10 years on charges of espionage, something that the State Department has called trumped up. Elaine?
Well, Margaret, let's talk about these sanctions. Can you explain what these new sanctions entail?
So the new sanctions announced by the Trump administration today are aimed at individuals within the Revolutionary Guard and folks who are associated with missile development programs or funding of those in some form or fashion. These are not people who come to the United States, as Javad Zarif said to us in our interview. So these sanctions he dismissed as really symbolic. He said they're really aimed at poisoning the atmosphere. He sees this as the Trump administration not wanting to violate the terms of the nuclear deal themselves, but rather force Iran into a corner where Iran is under so much pressure that they choose to walk away. So that's what he is saying the Trump administration's calculus is here.
So meanwhile, Iran's parliament says it's going to impose its own sanctions against the U.S. So what can we expect those to be?
This is retaliatory. It really won't have much of any impact. Right. Of course, the U.S. dollar impacts people because it is the currency of most big business transactions worldwide. When Iran does this, it's really just a slap on the wrist, really. But it is sending the signal here that this is thin ice we're on diplomatically. The Trump administration did say Iran's abiding by the terms, the letter of the law when it comes to this agreement, but they are making clear that President Trump is thinking pretty hard about possibly breaking away from it if Iran in any way deviates from this agreement.
What about the travel ban? The travel ban enacted by the Trump administration has now been in effect for about 3 weeks. This is a ban that encompasses Iran and other countries. So this is set to last 90 days. What has Iran's response to that been?
Well, Iran's top diplomat, Javad Zarif, I asked about this because he had been on Twitter, just like President Trump, very vocal in his views about what this travel ban meant. And this was against 6 Muslim-majority countries, including Iran. And in many ways, this rhetoric, Zarif called it repugnant. He called this an offense to all Iranian people. This is the kind of rhetoric that in many ways helps those hardliners who want to feed some anti-American sentiment. But by and large, it is not representative of some of the deep ties that there are between the U.S. and Iran when it comes to medical exchange and things like that. So in our interview, Zarif underscored again and again that these kind of bans impact families and impact other people. He was arguing it is unfair, but of course, he's also downplaying the fact that Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism. The U.S. thinks it's the largest one because of their support for Hezbollah and groups like Hamas.
Well, you asked about the complicated relationship between Iran and the U.S. Let's play some of what Zarif had to say.
I wouldn't call it friendship. We considered each other adversaries very clearly. Nobody had any illusions about the views of the other side. And I think it's possible with the new administration, provided that the new administration is prepared to live by the commitments that the United States government, not an administration in the United States. President Obama represented the entire United States, not simply a part of the United States, as President Trump does.
So what comes next, based on what we just heard there, for the Iranians, for the Americans, as they look ahead to this relationship?
President Trump is warning Iran it's on thin ice. We heard Iran's top diplomat there basically say the same things. He said explicitly to me in the interview that this kind of rhetoric jeopardizes this deal. But he extended a hand in that interview as well, saying, look, there's still a chance at diplomacy here. He told me, as Secretary Tillerson told me, they'd speak to each other on the phone. They're not opposed to that, to talking to each other. They just haven't found a reason to, or the right venue or the right moment to do so yet. The U.S. is still formulating its Iran policy. The Trump administration hasn't decided whether it's going to stick by this nuclear deal long term or not. But what you heard there from Iran's top diplomat was saying, look, what the Obama administration negotiated with us wasn't a friendship treaty. This was specific to the nuclear program. Don't throw this out. Of course, President Trump campaigned on promising to do just that or renegotiate it, something that, frankly speaking, not many of the other signatories, Russia, China, many of the European countries are willing to do. So it's not clear what President Trump really is planning to do with this agreement. He's already torn up other international agreements like the climate change one. This one could have some extremely immediate diplomatic crisis.
All right, a fascinating conversation. Margaret Brennan, thanks so much for stopping by. I appreciate it.